Thank you.
Let me first start with costs. I mean, I hear a lot of estimates, and again, they're all projections, but let's take a look at some actual costs. Again, I'll refer people to our committee's report on my trip to Israel. 143 miles worth of fence, constructed between 2011 and 2013, average cost $2.9 million per mile. Now, you can have some inflationary cost increases beginning. $2.9 million per mile. Pretty effective fence. 16,000 illegal crossings down to 18, 1-8. Yeah, and by the way, if you'd like your minority report to enter in the record, happy to do so. I know you're talking about 270 acres of land being purchased, average cost about $42,600. Depending on how you purchase that land, whether you do it in furlough versus chain, 660 feet by 66, or square acres, somewhere the cost per mile of acquiring that land, based on that, would be $340,000 to $1 million. So tack on $1 million to 2.9, total cost of a 2,000-mile wall. And I don't think anybody here in this hearing room is, maybe there, suggesting 2,000 miles. We're looking at the right kind of fencing in the right place, but even that would be less than $8 billion, somewhere between 5 and 8. So again, I want to be talking about real costs. Mr. Aguilar, the 650 miles of current fencing, again, I'm waiting on the study, and it'll be interesting when we have real information from DHS talking about their evaluation and what the real recommendation will be. Can you just give me your evaluation of the current fencing? About 350 miles of that is pedestrian fencing, about 300 miles is vehicle fencing. How good is it? I mean, how much needs to be replaced? In your estimation, how much more would need to be built?
So the existing fence right now has been absolutely critical to get us to where we are today at the level of control that exists along our border with Mexico. But again, I need to reiterate that it is the fence, the technology, and the personnel in order to be responsive to any kind of breaching attempt that is done, whether it is with a 19-foot ladder or otherwise. Otherwise being the tunneling, the ultralights flying overhead, the catapulting that's happening, the bridging of the fences. All of these things are in fact happening. We cannot forget, though, that the purpose of the fence is to deter, to impede, to basically create more time and distance for the officers to be able to responsibly react and take the actions necessary. So of the existing fence that is out there now, there is quite a bit of it that needs to be replaced. And the reason for that is what Chief Colburn and I and other Border Patrol agents did. We actually built those fences back when we didn't have the support of the American public, as I put it. So a lot of it needs to be replaced. Now, as to how much is required, that is going to depend on the chiefs that are in the field right now, which is exactly the position that I took as the National Chief of the Border Patrol, that I was going to the chiefs in the field, asking them what they needed, where they needed it, what the type of fencing was, and what the purpose and rationale was, taking into account the very difficult decisions that we knew were going to be taking place. Eminent domain, heart-wrenching. I was born, bred, and raised in Texas, not unlike Montana, not unlike Oklahoma, not unlike Missouri, where some of these are very touching situations and very hard. But I have to say that the oath that people like Mr. Colburn and I took was not to Texas, was not to South Texas, was not to Southern Arizona, it was to the country. It was what was best needed to be done to protect the country, the United States, in the best way that we could. So that is what we're looking for now to move forward.
You talked about the goal being to impede, to deter. In Israel, theirs was about a 15-foot fence. And the whole design, first of all, you could see through it, which was an important design consideration. I think that's important. But the whole purpose was to give them about a 5-minute response time.
Exactly.
And that's what they have, a 5-minute response time. So it's built with very thick rebar. It can't be cut through. It can't just be clipped. You'd have to have a pretty good saw. It takes time, so you have enough time for the Border Patrol in Israel to respond. I mean, is that basically what the primary goal of the fencing?
Absolutely. It's to deter and impede the flow and create that time and distance is critically important. Now, depending on where you're building the fence, it could be minutes, it could be hours, and in some cases, it could be longer than that the Border Patrol needs to impede in order to take the appropriate actions.
You're talking about the specific challenges in Texas. I'm not going to identify the members of Congress, but I've spoken with Texas Congress members of the House who say that levees, would really work well and are actually supported by the public. I mean, can you speak to that as part of the solution?
That was a very unique situation that we took in Texas. The levees, as we probably all have heard, are critically important for the flooding of the Rio Grande. And the actions that we took as a part of the Border Patrol back then, the sitting chiefs basically identified the Rio Grande at South Texas requiring fencing. We worked with the local community on an ongoing basis and spoke to them at length about what could be done. What we literally did is took the existing dirt levees, cut them down the middle, and abutted against them, reinforced the existing levees with concrete, in some areas as high as 20, 30 feet. Above those levees, after we set that abutted concrete, we built the walls that needed to be built on top of that to continue the deterrence perspective. It worked very well. It was a community effort, community of the locals, community of the Border Patrol as an organization, and DHS.
So do you think that'd be a solution in larger areas of Texas?
There will be some areas that can be accommodated like that. One of the things that I am absolutely sure of that DHS, CBP, and especially the Border Patrol will be doing going forth on this is working with the local communities as we did back then. Dr. Julieta Garcia, I worked with her personally on an ongoing basis. I met with her 3 or 4 times at the University of Texas in Brownsville on building and accommodating what we actually eventually built at UTB.
Mr. Coburn, in your testimony, you're relating direct experience, similar to Israel, 16,000 to 18, similar types of dramatic numbers in terms of fencing barriers actually work. I'll just give you, I've got a little time left. Of the 650 miles, how much do you think needs to be replaced? How much more do you think has to be built? I mean, just, we're not going to hold you to it because we're going to wait for the DHS study, but just, some sort of general feel.
I'll answer it in 2 parts. First, the collection of chiefs of the 9 southwest border sectors all jointly say they need more fencing, as well as repairs and improvements on existing. That said, just to name some mileage in Yuma sector, the sector that I served for a period of time as chief when fence was started, they currently have over 63 miles of primary fence, 9 miles of what is called secondary fence behind some of that primary fence. They have over 28 miles of all-weather roads. So when we talk about infrastructure, sometimes it's not just a barrier, it's to give access. We added nearly 9 miles of permanent lighting, which actually the community of San Luis, Rio Colorado, Mexico was very appreciative of. Crime went down in Mexico as well. We added 44.5 miles of permanent vehicle barriers of a couple different styles. And we even had 9 miles of tertiary fence on the flanks of the San Luis Port of Entry, 3 rows of fencing. That just gives an example of what is necessary. I think that the gates and bridges that were built along the Colorado River, where there are also ditches and irrigation usage of the water for farming, we added 18 vehicle gates and 1 bridge to the bridges already existing. We even added water wells for access by the agricultural land users.
So basically, we just rattled off there, and what I have in my briefing, about a couple hundred miles of different forms of fencing. Out of how long is Yuma sector in total?
125 miles.
Okay.
So because it's overlapping, it exceeds that. And uniquely, the Imperial Sand Dunes National Monument area has the floating fence. And I know you can go online and see it's quite unique and quite effective. In 2008, we lost a brave Border Patrol agent, Louis Aguilar, because there was no fence. I was quoted by the Corps of Engineers when they published their book on fencing on the front cover as saying that will never happen again there because of that floating fence.
By the way, Israel has technology for sands as well. It works quite well. Senator McCaskill.